Hello and welcome everybody to Kubernetes Online Master Class Series hosted by Rancher. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining from. We had close to 800 people registered for this class, and we are expecting many hundreds to join from all over the world. Welcome. So just to kind of give you a background, some of you may be joining the second or the third time, but those who are joining the first time, we started this series about 3 months ago, and we have received a tremendous response from the community and from people such as yourself who are eager to learn more about Kubernetes. And the reason why we do this, why we host this series, is because we talk to thousands of users ourselves. We go to conferences like DockerCons and KubeCons and OpenShift Summit, collect a lot of feedback from people. And what we find is that irrespective of the industry and the company, the challenges that users face with Kubernetes are common. They mostly relate to things like how to manage multiple clusters, how to deal with security challenges, best way to monitor workloads, and many other Kubernetes topics. So from that perspective, we have created this series where we have covered things like migrating existing applications, Prometheus support, troubleshooting, how to run database, and there are a few more classes that are coming up. If you are interested, you can go to our website, which is rancher.com/Kubernetes Master Class, separated by hyphens. And the interesting topics here are how to move from virtualization to containerization of network functions. Istio, which is a very popular topic. Again, Istio with a partner, New Vector, and they are going to focus more on the security side of the things. And then finally, bringing observability to Kubernetes, which is a big theme these days. And there we are going to co-host it with Datadog. But today we are talking about managing multiple clusters on Kubernetes. Kubernetes is a great platform for managing resources and for orchestrating containers. But setting it up, tuning it for operational efficiency, it's really a hard problem. You have to worry about not just starting a cluster, but to provide it the right security policies, integrations with your AD provider, monitoring it, setting up alerts, setting up Kubernetes settings in general, and much more. And as you scale, you often need to deploy more clusters. But from an operational standpoint, that complicates your deployment. Now you have to spend more time, not just standing it up, but also for managing and maintaining this fleet of clusters that you have now. Now, before we get into details, some housekeeping that I will do quickly. Each class is about 40 to 45 minutes where we do presentation and demo. Questions are always welcome. There are really no bad questions. Ask us whatever is on your mind. Use the questions tab to write your questions, but remember, they may not all be private. So we try to respond to the questions in a way that answer is accessible to everybody. And we prefer it that way, but if for some reason you want your questions to be private, then let us know and mark it private. This session is being recorded. Actually, this is one of the questions we get again and again. Are you recording this? Yes, we are. And then recording is available both on YouTube as well as our own website. So again, if you go to Kubernetes Masterclass, you can access the recordings of the previous sessions as well. While the session is on, you can join us on Slack and post over there. You can also become part of our community, and you can tag whether on Twitter or on Slack with a #masterclass hashtag. So presenters today, Melissa Wiener, Tommy Grissom from Wizards of the Coast, and they're going to go over their own introductions. But my name is Ankur Agarwal. I'm head of product management here at Rancher Labs. My job is to define new capabilities and products for our users. And prior to joining Rancher, I built and ran Cubeship.io, which was an accelerator focused on container delivery. I've been in DevOps and cloud computing space for almost 10 years now, and I've built several cloud products for companies such as VMware, Mercury Interactive, and of course now Rancher. So I'll be answering your questions on chat while the presentation is going on, and then I'll be helping to close this out. All right, with that, Melissa and Tommy, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ankur. Appreciate that.
Give us just a moment while we take control of the chat.
I am Tommy Grissom. I'm the Senior Systems Engineer here at Wizards of the Coast. I've had the opportunity to work with Wizards on several projects so far since I've been here. including the design of our internal private cloud, how we're going to leverage the public cloud, and most recently, how we're going to solve many container-related questions that have come up.
And I'm Melissa Wiener. I'm a DevOps engineer here at Wizards of the Coast. I've been here close to 2 years now, working on the same team as Tommy, focusing a little bit more on like some of our logging solutions and our billing solutions for how we bill back all these cloud services back to their respective teams. And then about a year ago, we started using Rancher. This is to support our emerging Kubernetes needs with supporting our in-house teams. Now these in-house teams could be working on our new games or new applications to support our tabletop products or just internal services. And here's an illustration showing what our Kubernetes needs are. We've got a lot of teams that hear about Kubernetes, they want to start using it, and they don't really know where to get started. Like maybe they just want a cluster, maybe they don't even want to think about the infrastructure and they just want to deploy. Maybe they think they're experts and they want to roll their own cluster. That's fine, but we got to get ahead of it all and try to manage it. And that's why we went with Rancher. It's been a real good tool so far for helping us keep this chaos contained.
So some of the problems that were identified when we were trying to figure out how we're going to solve our Kubernetes needs was, first of all, multi-tenancy. So what we have are many groups of development teams that we work with to make digital products. Each team needs to be able to run independently of each other, work in various tools, and have their own dedicated space within those tools to do their work. We need to also figure out scalability, how we're going to be able to scale out our Kubernetes clusters so that each of those teams can actually get their resources when they need them and continue to grow on their own without impacting other users. But at the same time, how we're going to manage that scale so that each team doesn't have so many clusters and we lose track of how many there are, where they are. And finally, how we're going to handle recoverability. Because while it's easy to stand up a container in a Kubernetes cluster in one region, how are we going to handle getting that data, that container to another region and make sure the backend data for that is still available and persistent as well. So those are some of the high-level problems that we were trying to address when we're working through our design for how we're going to handle Kubernetes and containers. So high level, what we decided to do is break up our container management into a couple different options. So we have two models where we have a large team that is dedicated to building a large product, in which case in our AWS space, we go ahead and stand up a pair of accounts for them to leverage. We have a dev and a prod account, and then within there, we decided to leverage EKS as our Kubernetes solution. That way, we can focus more on the high-level management of mini clusters rather than having to get down in the weeds of managing Kubernetes itself. Because managing Kubernetes itself is already a struggle, so since there's already a solution for having a managed version of it, we figured that would be the quickest, easiest way to allow us to get further by leveraging less resources on the back end. So in that model, what happens is those developers on those teams who get their own independent EKS clusters, they can spin up as many projects as they need with that environment, any sort of namespace inside there, throw many containers at it, and it's dedicated to them. But what we found is some of our smaller internal teams, it doesn't entirely make sense to spin up an entire 2 or 3 node EKS cluster when really they just have a need to spin up a container or two and not really much past that. So in order to reduce costs a bit, we also came up with a model where we have this shared cluster idea. So we also have this shared EKS dev cluster, shared EKS prod cluster, and we worked on paring down the access to those so that those teams can spin up within those environments just what they need. So that way we can reduce the cost by not having to manage as many large clusters. All of this is then made manageable by using Rancher to spin up these clusters for us, manage them, so we can go to one place, see the status for our clusters, make sure everything is healthy, get reporting back, and adjust if needed to from there, as well as grant access to the customers through Rancher to see their cluster. So a little more breakdown on how the splitting up of that works. So to make manageability of all these various teams a little easier. So for the case where a whole team has a whole large product and they have their own dedicated product EKS clusters, we then give them full access to the entire cluster so they can stand up their projects. Perhaps they have a back-end project and a front-end project, and within there they have the ability to then create appropriate namespaces and deploy services. Alternatively, the shared model, the projects, the light blue box in the diagram, we would actually spin that up ahead of time, and we set up appropriate access controls so that a team can be granted access to those specific projects, only see their project. So while even though they're in a shared cluster, they still don't have visibility into another team's project that they're not allowed to see. But they still have the flexibility so that within their project, they can create as many namespaces as they need to. So the difference here is then they would just have to worry about the namespace, the pods, and containers inside there. Now, the concept of how do we handle recoverability with the dedicated cluster, it's fairly straightforward. We stand up their environment, their EKS. They can worry about using their backend services such as RDS or any sort of standalone EC2 if they may need. And they can worry about replicating those off to another region. And then same with their EKS cluster, we can make sure it's also available in another region for them. Now, that gets a little trickier when leveraging the concept of a shared cluster. Since in a shared cluster, those customers may have a separate AWS account that their backend services live in than the shared cluster, which is going to be in a centralized account. So what we've found to work through that is by setting up VPC peerings between the cluster that hosts the account that hosts the shared cluster and the account that holds that team's backend resources, we're able to allow their containers to access their backend resources. What that allows us to do is offload the replication efforts for those backend services to those teams so they can replicate from US West to US East or whichever region they need. And then we can just make sure that the shared cluster then can be brought back up in another region, and then the customer's containers brought back up in that cluster. At that point, they should then be able to reconnect their containers back to their services they've replicated. So this seems to, for us, has worked out to be a pretty solid model to ensure that customers can get the size of environment they need and make sure also they get the recoverability of their application. But at the same time, we can actually manage all of the different clusters and environments that all of our teams need. So Melissa has a demo which we can kind of show off some of the multi-tenancy controls that we have in place and show off some examples of how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and hand off to Melissa.
All right. Thank you, Tom. So what I'm going to show you today is just a couple of different scenarios of like different types of users that might be logging into the same Rancher instance. So I've logged in already as user X, and user X immediately sees that they have access to two different clusters, and inside those clusters, they can access a project inside, which I've called Product X. Now, these users are members of what we call the shared cluster model. So they can only see what is in their project, and they can deploy, they can do really whatever they need to within the confines of their own project. And they don't know if there are other projects that are also going on this same cluster, but it doesn't matter for them. They just need a place to deploy. One tool that we wrote up to help manage specifically Nginx ingress for the shared cluster model is taking Nginx ingress and then wrapping it up into a little custom Helm chart that I built that allows it to make it easier to deploy multiple instances of Nginx ingress with a different identifier, with a different Amazon Certificate Manager ACM cert behind it. So I've already got pulled up this catalog item that I attached our private GitHub repo to, and it's really easy. I just kind of gave it an identifier of this is multi-ingress X in the multi-ingress X namespace, gave it an identifier, and gave it its specific certificate ARN. And when we do this, the only thing that we have to keep in mind is that when you then deploy your application, you have to include this ingress class equals nginx dash whatever identifier you set. That will allow your application to select the right ingress controller. I'm going to go ahead and launch that. Apparently I already have that namespace. And it usually launches pretty quickly, but at its core, this is just your basic Nginx ingress install with an ACM certificate that I've just made a little bit easier to handle doing it multiple times on the same cluster with different ACM certs because we like ACM certs. So hopefully that will actually load. Since it's a demo, it's taking a minute. Okay. So that's something that I got to look at later. Seems like maybe some of my user tackles aren't working. But it's a demo, that's supposed to happen. So next, I'll log in as the next user Q. And when they log in, they don't see demo dev, they don't see demo prod, they just see their cluster demo product Q. And these guys, this is an example of the dedicated cluster model. So this might be a larger product, it might be a game of its own. They have access to the full cluster. And they even have access to the system and the default projects. And they can create new projects within, easy. We don't play around too much with resource quotas, but it's something that we're going to be looking at later, just for our own stuff. So this type of model allows these dedicated cluster users to get into their own cluster, manage their own things, and not have to worry about anyone else in the shared clusters. And then finally, if we log in as our admin user, this might be users such as Tommy or myself who are trying to manage these whole fleets. We see all of the clusters. If we go into each cluster, we can see all of the projects within. So if you remember that first demo dev, the user X could only see the product X, but here the admin can see that there's a bunch of other projects within. We've got our infrastructure project. Here's where I set up a couple of those working multi-ingress controllers earlier. We can also set up like our Prometheus Grafana monitoring. I don't think any of those will actually load because xip.io does not work for me ever, bane of my existence. And that is pretty much what I've got to show you in the Rancher UI. So we're going to switch back to the slides. Tommy's going to take it back. Yeah, and so for next steps, I want to remind you guys that we've only been using Rancher for about a year. We actually came into this as like total newbies to Kubernetes, so we've been learning this whole time, and there's a lot more that we still want to do. So one of the things we want to do, better cost breakdowns for the shared cluster. Right now we have the EKS management plane and all the nodes deployed into one shared infrastructure AWS account. We want to be able to divvy up the costs of running that cluster to all the members on the cluster. So we're going to be looking into different existing applications that do that based on pod usage. We also need to utilize all the cool improvements that came with Rancher 2.2. In production, we're actually not running 2.2 yet. That's coming soon. So we're going to have to do a whole bunch of learning there, better catalog management, such as like allowing our custom catalogs to only be available for certain clusters. And other things we're trying to figure out, persistent storage for the shared clusters. We want to be able to have persistent storage living out in all of these siloed AWS accounts instead of the main infrastructure account.
At this point, we'll go ahead and open up questions. So I've seen some questions come in already. We'll try to answer some of those within the chat. So we'll go through some of the ones that have not yet been answered and go ahead and answer those. So what are you thinking for cost management for a shared cluster?
Again, like we've looked a little bit at different tools, and I actually can't recall the name of them. I've watched a pretty cool presentation at KubeCon this last year on something that was built more specifically for Google's Kubernetes engine. So I'm going to be trying to find that again. And again, like we might be divvying it up by just number of pods first to make it real easy and real basic. Or in the future, we might look at something a little bit more complex than just number of pods. It might be like CPU usage. It might be something else.
Next question, do you have another Rancher install for upgrades so devs can do full regression testing before upgrading prod Rancher? So today what we have is a dev and prod Rancher. The dev Rancher is more intended for us to be able to do upgrades and test out new features first, so we actually don't have any customers on that instance. Instead, all the customers use just the prod instance. They then can use, assign their dev or prod containers, pods into there. But I guess to your point, no, today we do not allow them to test their dev code on a new version first, but that's probably a good idea for a future version and something for us to consider. Next question, do you have DR plan on AWS for your cluster? How would you deal with Rancher servers being unavailable? So we do have a DR plan for Rancher itself. So all of our Rancher environment, we've actually, I'd say it's been mostly Melissa working with a consultant to build out a whole Terraform and Ansible automation so that we can actually automatically deploy Rancher entirely from scratch, which is actually how we do our upgrades and testing and dev. Is we'll completely blow away dev, deploy out a new version of it by Terraform Ansible automation, and test everything out on that. So in the case of, for whatever reason, US West going offline, we would just run that automation against US East to bring up a new version, and then the backend etcd database is replicated over to US East as well. So then we just reattach to that etcd database, and we shoot back online pretty quick.
Yeah, and we're taking constant etcd backups about every 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Next question is, how is Rancher different than Fortainer? I'm going to leave that to our host to answer that. Ankur, is that one that you would be able to speak to?
My apologies, guys. I was on mute. And we are talking about the last question, which is Rancher 2 Terraform provider production ready?
Just the before that one. How is Rancher different than Portainer?
I am not sure what Portainer is, frankly, and but I can tell you what Rancher does, and you can map it to Portainer. Excuse me. Rancher is a way for you to create, operate, and manage your Kubernetes clusters, many or just one. It depends on what your use case is. And we provide not just the UI on top of how to create, manage, and operate Kubernetes, but we also provide a number of other tools and services. For example, how do you monitor it? Built-in alerts and notifiers, CI/CD pipelines, a way for you to abstract out your namespaces and create projects which can sort of give you multi-tenant support on Kubernetes, which doesn't come easily. RBAC, the full cluster can be RBAC'd in many ways using our own RBAC capability. And then integrations with your AD providers to authenticate users. So Rancher has many capabilities. Please check us out on rancher.com. There are a couple of other questions about Rancher. I'm happy to take those if you want me to, or if you have questions, then I'm.
This next question, also maybe you could answer as well, is Rancher 2 Terraform provider production ready?
We can support Terraform through webhooks, but we are also looking at a fully integrated Terraform capability within Rancher. And I think the idea here is to kind of provision nodes. I'm going to guess, since the question was not specifically geared toward that, but I'm going to assume that it is to provision nodes. And the answer to that is there is a way to do that. And then we are coming up with capability, inbuilt capability to just provide it out of the box. Can Rancher operate Docker containers? Rancher operates Kubernetes. And if the question is, once again, the question is a little bit unclear. Are you asking, can Rancher be an orchestrator like Kubernetes? Then the answer is that, yeah, we used to have that many years ago. We used to have our own orchestrator called Cattle. We don't do that anymore. We actually use Kubernetes as an orchestrator for Docker containers, and we don't have any plans to build our own. I think Kubernetes is an industry standard. There's a huge community behind it. We have our own Kubernetes distro, and we don't think there is any users get any benefit by having yet another orchestrator in the market. So we are going to continue down that path of supporting Kubernetes and supporting the community.
Thank you, Ankur. For the next one, could you show the RBAC user management, how you restrict access to projects when there are many users on different projects? I will go ahead and switch presentation back over to Melissa so that she can demonstrate that.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll show you kind of my demo version of it and speak more to what we're doing on production. On production, we have this hooked up to our ADFS install, so we've got a whole bunch of ADFS groups in the background, and we can then just add people to groups, assign the groups to each cluster project level, and do it that way. But here in our demo version, we're just using local users. So inside like the demo dev cluster, at the cluster level, we've got members, and I've made user X a cluster member. And then at the project level, you can also go to members, and I've made user X a project owner. And so just similarly, if you're using ADFS or some other single sign-on tool, you should be able to add user groups and then be able to search by groups and add that entire group as member. And then, however you manage your AD groups would then also manage cluster or project ownership.
And next question, Ankur, maybe you can answer this one. Any built-in tools in Rancher for cost management?
I'm not sure I understand that question again, like cost management of what? Are you asking about cost management of infrastructure? Then if you're using vSphere, then vCenter comes with that capability, and vCloud definitely does, I think. And if you are using any of the cloud providers, then they have their own billing mechanism in which they operate. So we don't, like, I don't know how to read this question, but maybe you can specify more of what exactly you're asking for. But we don't kind of take your bill from AWS, for example, and show it to you. I think there's a better way to do that, and that is just to refer to AWS. I'll take the next one. Portainer is an alternative to Kubernetes. Well, if Portainer is an alternative to Kubernetes, then we don't support it, and we are not planning to support it anytime soon. I think as far as Docker orchestration is concerned, container orchestration is concerned, Kubernetes has become the de facto standard. And for now, we will continue to use that. Rancher OS as an alternative to CentOS with Docker. Is Rancher OS still the way to go? Is it actively in development? Yes, it is. Rancher OS is very much alive and kicking. So if you would like to use it, please use it. It's a very slimmed down version. Those who have not played with it, it's a very slimmed down version of Linux that reduces the load on your virtual machines. So please check it out. But yeah, it's very much in development. Actively, we work on that. Project X costs X. You know, once again, I think you're trying to kind of get into chargeback type of capability, and no, we don't do that, and we are not planning to work on that either. For now, at least, it's something that every cloud provider that you work with is already doing. How do you handle permissions with your cluster? Okay, I think Tommy and Melissa, this should go back to you.
Yep. So go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, so again, like for permissions with your clusters, we just use the Rancher UI to set those permissions manually. Usually we just set them to member or owner, but you do have the ability to go in and like specify each individual rule. And again, we usually assign these to groups instead of just giving users. So we'll have like a cluster demo dev project X group so that every member of project X gets access to their dev shared cluster, and you just add them in there, and they would all have similar permissions because they're all in the same group. We might have another group just for project X for like project X administrators and give them a little bit more. Like you can really set up however many as you want, as long as you can manage your AD groups effectively.
So that also answers the next question, which was a question about user management. Most companies would have users and groups already in Active Directory, and Rancher integrates with that. Rancher does integrate with Active Directory, so you can use that directly. We, however, integrate with ADFS so that we can use our single sign-on provider for that. It should work effectively the same way, though. With ADFS, we can see all the groups that a user is part of and map those permissions. Is Wasi looking at Kubernetes on bare metal? At this time, we're not looking at hosting bare metal Kubernetes clusters yet. However, we are still considering what our hybrid option looks like, where we don't host all of our Kubernetes in AWS, but instead start to bring some in-house. And when we start to look at that in more detail, we will start to compare the difference between bare metal Kubernetes versus Kubernetes hosted on top of VMware, for example.
I'll say we're always looking for ways to tinker with that. So we don't want to just get comfortable using AWS and EKS. We want to always be looking at different options.
Next question might be for Ankur.
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, so we support quite a bit of OAuth and SAML providers and AD providers, so please check us out. In fact, would you guys be kind enough to bring up the Rancher page with the under security for authentication, and you know, maybe everybody could get a quick view of all the AD providers that we have, since we have a cluster running.
Yeah, I've got it up on my screen actually.
So these are all the providers for authentication that we already support. Google is not one of them. However, the good news is we are actively working on Google. We are actively working on Google right now, and we hope to release it before the end of this year. And then the last one is, can Rancher work on private clouds? Yes, absolutely. We just need to know where your nodes are and or where your physical machines are, where your virtual machines are, and then we can connect to them. And then maybe you have different configurations where you can you allow us to go and provision the nodes ourselves, or you do not. And we have both ways of working with your private clouds, where we do have um, uh, a way to go and provision it ourselves, or if the nodes are provisioned by someone else, then we can still get them registered on the Kubernetes cluster that is managed by Rancher. Please add support for, I think this, GitLab. Okay, OAuth on OIDC, that is on one of the things that we do want to work for, GitLab OAuth, and it's right after Google. If we pick up the next auth provider, then most likely it's going to be GitLab. So we are still looking at it. Will Rancher support static IPs for the Kubernetes nodes? I am not sure about if we are going to do that or if we already do that, but this is one of the questions that I will have to come back to you with an answer for. Can Rancher work on hybrid environments? Not sure what it means, but do you mean that some of your nodes are in the cloud and some are in your data center? Is that the idea of hybrid clouds? Or does Rancher sit in private cloud and has to provision nodes on public cloud? And the answer is that they're both possible. You just have to set it up, and they're not very difficult to do. So all you need to do is to define what we call node templates, provide us the keys, and then once we have the access to whichever cloud you want to go to, then we can go and provision the nodes there. Okay, can we have on a same cluster node? You could, but I always ask the question, why? Why would you want to have nodes provisioned in different providers on the same cluster? That, just from the use case perspective and reality perspective, we have hundreds of users, we have thousands of teams worldwide. I don't see that use case very often. So I'm not sure if this is something that you're planning to do. And if you are, I'm interested in learning more of why you would do something like that and what benefit you're getting. Maybe there is something that I don't realize. And probably you have played with it and it has worked for you. So I'm curious about that. But the answer is, technically you could, but it just no, it's not something I would recommend anybody to do unless there's a very good use case behind it. I think that's it for questions. I'm not getting any more. Do you guys want to talk about cloud Wizards of Coast? Do you want to talk about anything else? Otherwise, we can give everybody their 20 minutes back.
That's all we had to talk about. Ankur, I can go ahead and make you the presenter again if you had some additional slides you wanted to follow up on.
Yeah, I will just wrap it up.
Sounds good.
Okay. Let us see. Okay, so there were a lot of questions about what Rancher is, and this is typical. We typically get it. So Rancher is an enterprise container management platform. Anytime you hear something like container as a service, then Rancher is one of the options that you could use. We are not the only ones, but we are one, and we are fully open source. So unlike many others CAS providers, we are absolutely 100% open source. No part of our capability is paid for. The only reason why do we do this? And that's the next question. Why do we do this and how do we make money? Well, when you get serious about deploying containers in your enterprises and using them, at some point of time, you would need support for your CAS platform. And that's when people come to us for support, and we support it. But otherwise, we are fully open source. We operate under Apache 2.0 license, so it's very permissive. These are all the capabilities we provide. You can create and operate multiple clusters. And that's not just about creation, but also you don't only get the user interface. That's definitely one of the beautiful things you get from us. But then other than that, you get the full service catalog, you get CI/CD pipelines, you get monitoring, logging, and alerting. We in fact deploy built-in capabilities so that there are built-in alerts that get you started without doing any setup, and then you can obviously go and build new alerts. We give you your built-in monitoring with Prometheus and a dashboard with Grafana to view that, and once again, it's built into the product. And we support all of these things. So if you come back to us and say, I want you to support my Rancher instance, then that will include support for the monitoring capabilities as well. For example, Prometheus and Grafana. We give you unified cluster operations where you can provision nodes, provision clouds. We give you full auth and RBAC that we just talked about. You can create policies like your security policies, part security policies, for example. Under security, we also have roles and full RBAC capability and users that you can that can be assigned to individual roles, or multiple roles can be assigned to a single user. You can do some kind of capacity management by assigning more nodes. We also give you self-healing nodes, which means if a node goes down in your cluster, it automatically comes up if we recognize that it's going down. Let me keep moving. I'm sure there are a lot of questions on how do I get started, and I have done this myself a few months ago. If you're new to Docker containers, it may take you 5 to 10 minutes. If you understand Docker containers even at a high level, then it should take you no more than 5 minutes to get started on Rancher. Install it, and it's basically a simple Docker run command once you have your Linux host running, and have Docker installed on that. And that's as simple. It's as simple as that to get started on Rancher and have your cluster running. We have a ton of YouTube videos you can go and view. We also do a very basic Kubernetes startup class, and that's every Thursday at 10 a.m. And it's like, think of it as Kubernetes 101. So if you're just figuring out like, what is this thing and how do I get started, that's a very good class. Once again, just go to rancher.com and you will find it there. So just search for Kubernetes 101 or Kubernetes training with Rancher. If you want to check out our source code, then it's all on GitHub. It's all public, so you are more than welcome to download it, use it, install it in any way that you want. You can follow us at Rancher_labs. If you want to tweet about us, #RancherKates. We keep introducing new projects for the community. We recently introduced several new ones like K3s, which is a very slimmed down, very efficient Kubernetes distro. So you can go look at it, and it has everything that you would need for Kubernetes. And we have removed a lot of things that you typically don't use in Kubernetes, like deprecated classes and some of those things. If you have any further questions, I'm happy to stay and keep answering them, but seems like we have run out of questions as well. There's one more question for you guys. What was the largest challenge that you had in multi-Kubernetes? I think that means multi-cluster environment.
Sure. I'd say actually the largest challenge that we've had is one that we're still figuring out, and that is how to effectively use persistent storage. And that's mostly because of our own inexperience and our developers' inexperience. Like they know that they need persistent storage, but we're all trying to figure out the best way to get it to them. And part of the challenge is, again, with our shared cluster model, we would like where their physical data stores to be on their own little siloed AWS clusters and not in the shared infrastructure account.
Okay.
So we're figuring that out. Unfortunately, I don't have a better answer for how we solved that challenge, but that might just be.
All right. Thank you, Melissa and Tommy. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And if you have questions, please reach out to us. You can always go to rancher.com, find the contact information, fire some questions that we haven't been able to answer today. Check out our Kubernetes Master Class Series. I think we hosted something around persistent volumes, or if not, it may be on the agenda that's coming up, or it's one of the items that if you haven't handled, then we would love to handle it if there is a lot of interest in that. But I will close it now. Thank you very much for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you.